Great. Good evening and welcome to the Thursday, January 18th, 2024 meeting of the school committee. We have just returned from executive session, so I would invite those who are here in the studio to please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, the first item on our agenda is public comments. I do not see anybody here from the public, so we can move into recognitions. Anybody have a recognition tonight? Okay, then that brings us into reports, and Jack, you're up first.
Hello, everyone. I would like to begin my report with a quick thank you. I've been asked by my classmates and most people at the high school to say thank you to Dr. Kavanaugh for our wonderful snow day on Tuesday. At the high school, we are nearing the end of semester 1. The mid-year exams will begin next Tuesday with students attending their 6th and 7th period classes. The order of exams is reverse chronological, with Wednesday being periods 4 and 5, Thursday being periods 2 and 3, and Friday being period 1 classes as well as a makeup block. The Student Council Talent Show is also taking place tonight. Students from all classes are welcome to attend the show. It is currently taking place at the high school and is being streamed on HCAM as well. For Hiller Athletics, some big events coming up include Unite for the Fight on January 24th at 6 p.m. at the New England Sports Center, rink number 1. Raffle tickets purchased ahead of the game are for the grand prize of a hockey stick signed by the Boston Bruins and also 4 tickets to a Bruins game donated by the 200 Foundation. There will also be t-shirts, bracelets, and baked goods for sale. All proceeds are to benefit the American Cancer Society. High school rec basketball is also back by popular demand. This is a casual games-only league for students in grades 9 through 12. The games will not be officiated, players will call their own fouls, and parent volunteers will supervise. And lastly, a quick reminder, once again, that the Hopkinen High School Quiz Show team has earned a televised spot on season 15 of the high school quiz show. Their long-awaited match will take place on Saturday, January 20th, at 11 o'clock at the GBH Calderwood Studio in Boston against Andover High School. Thank
And
you.
what channel will it be carried on?
I'm not sure. I can check that
TV2,
for you.
right?
Yes,
Yes.
TV2.
Two.
Very exciting.
Very exciting.
So you're missing the talent show?
Yeah, it was a tough one.
Maybe you can get early dismissal from school committee.
Oh, yeah. Anybody have any questions for Jack? Any comments? All right. We love having you to give the updates, so
Thank
appreciate that. All right, that moves us into the superintendent's report.
All right, thank you. So this is the superintendent's report for January 18th, 2024. So today we had some very big things popping in the D wing at the high school. A shout out to our musicians. So they just completed districts last weekend at Mechanics Hall. So in the center you see a picture of all of the students from Hopkinton who played in the district band. But what you're seeing on the two sides, Mr. Hay was at rehearsal, and so he sent me some pictures of rehearsal. He said the kids sound phenomenal. And Mechanics Hall, as you know, is really beautiful. This weekend, those students that you see in the front will have tryouts for all states. So we may be having good music news coming up. Studio art, when the studio is just too small. So we have to be in the doing today. And Mrs. Janino was out in the hallway and she said, so you see our studio for studio art is too small. So when we're making sculptures or something, we have to send the kids out into the hallway to work. So there were actually quite a few groups out there working on their sculptures. So I'm not sure how many students are in that course, but there were quite a few of them not in the physical classroom. Today, our 4th graders were serving as judges of toys that were made by their high school counterparts in engineering classes. So you can see Mr. Scott there on the right with all of his high school students, and in the center you can see some of the 4th graders from Mrs. Esdale's classroom. I've taken a picture of some of the toys that they were going to try out and rate. And then there were a few other cool things happening in our schools. We had some kids who were preparing for their midterm exams in the atrium of the high school. So there was a squid, a fish, and a toucan. And they were filming a skit in Spanish for their Spanish midterm. So you don't see that every day. So Mr. LeBron and I had to stop and say, "Excuse me, toucan, can we take your picture?" And they were lovely about it.
Sounds like the beginning of a joke. A
It
fish, a
does.
squid, and a toucan showed up at the high school.
Train leaves the station. Okay, so, and then, of course, Number Corner, we always talk about it, but Mr. LeBron had an opportunity to go to a couple of our elementary schools this week and see how Number Corner works. And you can really probably talk about it better than I can, because it's super, it really is.
Yes, you might recall that last year we piloted this program as a component of our comprehensive elementary math program, K1 and 2. And this year the teachers are in a full implementation year. So every day the students gather literally in a corner of their classroom. They gather around a display. You'll notice that in 2 different classrooms there, the materials are actually uniform. So we're guaranteeing an instructional experience regardless of which of our dozens of classrooms that you're in. The teachers are giving us great feedback. The students are so highly engaged. They're engaging in a level of discourse as 6-year-olds, talking about and sometimes debating and contesting math ideas in a way that you might not typically see. And they get to still count the number of days we're in school and everything in between. So really a wonderful thing to see, and we are seeing already in some of our early benchmark math scores that this is having an impact. So we're really excited about that.
Some teamwork in an Elmwood physical education class, so you know how they do that with the parachute. First the parachute goes up and you all have to raise at the same time. And then of course in the middle photo they're all tucked under that parachute. And then in the third photo they're emerging from the parachute, so just very cute. And that's really all I have today, is just some cool student stuff.
Happy photos.
Yeah, happy photos.
Any questions for Dr. Kavanaugh? Okay, that moves us into the school committee chair report, and I wanted just to say that payroll warrant S24013 and S24014 have been approved. Warrant 24-036S has been approved, and the warrants have been included in your folder. I also just wanted to publicly announce that we had approved in executive session the executive session minutes from May 4th, 2023 and May 11th, 2023. The minutes from May 4th, 2023 were not released because the purpose of the executive session still exists. The executive session minutes from May 11th, 2023 were voted to be released and would be available through the superintendent's office. Okay. That brings us into liaison reports. Does anybody have any reports from liaison activity since last week?
The only update that I have with the CPAC is that we're working on finalizing the schedule for the collaborative meetings. That's very close to being finalized. Just we're kind of working out some of the last minute details, scheduling mostly.
Okay.
So will you share with us proposed dates, or will it be on a date where we already have a meeting scheduled?
It's going to be, there's a couple of meetings. There's the joint meetings that they're going to have with school committee, but then there's also their regular monthly meetings that are going to be scheduled too. So just kind of trying to work out all those dates, and I'm sure once that's finalized, those dates will be released.
Okay.
Okay.
Oh, sorry,
Yes.
I have liaison report. Just ESBC2 meeting was this week, I almost forgot. The interesting takeaway that I'll share, I mean, things are humming along, but one of the interesting takeaways I'll share is there are some preliminary designs to the sort of the aesthetics and the look and feel of the interior of the new Elmwood School. And, you know, they're talking about themes and trying to pick up on what is sort of essentially Hopkinton. So they're looking at our natural environment right now as an idea. It's just a proposal, and they're working through concepts. But it's exciting to see it come together. I know that the packet materials and everything are available, as I think the meeting is available as recorded too, if people want to take a look at what's emerging. But they'll have a series of workshops with, I think, staff and faculty to talk about what themes and so forth make sense. The school as designed has the 3 wings, so they're trying to sort of give each wing its own kind of thematic element, but things that all tie together. So I thought it was really interesting. I did mention that we are going to be initiating the naming process at this meeting, and that may also factor into how they design the interior. Is there anything else noteworthy to share?
No, just increases in numbers of bathrooms, but
Yes.
not that exciting.
Yes.
I love that idea of the sort of thematic approach for the different areas of the school.
Yeah.
It's kind of an
Yeah, it's
interesting
neat.
approach.
Okay, the other thing we wanted to do during our liaison reports is review, and I know that Georgette had sent out, just for everybody should have, and it's okay if you didn't have time to look through it, but the current liaison assignments that we have discussed back earlier over the summer, I think. She had changed Lori's name out, Holly's name out, and put Lori's name in. So you can look in terms of the Freedom Team, we were no longer using as a liaison, though, correct? Holly was on the Freedom Team, but not officially as a school committee. What was that?
I don't know. I thought we had a liaison role. We have one here.
We did previously, because I know that Holly is still on the Freedom Team. She was not on there, not as a rep, like a,
Right,
not as
yeah.
a spot that had been saved for the school committee.
Okay.
I mean, certainly they're open meetings, somebody could
Yeah.
be interested. So the two that, the Irvine Tadaro Committee was one that she had done. The Irvine Tadaro Committee, to my knowledge, has not met in over a year. It has to do with, I mean, it was originally formed to look at the property that now the new school is going to be built on. And it may have been more than 1 year since it met. The planning board meets on Mondays. Are there other roles that people are having challenges, either with regular attendance or like keeping up with the things that are going on, that you would rather kind of look to reallocate?
I mean, I've been keeping up with the HOP meetings.
Yep.
But it is, sometimes I find it a challenge.
Yep.
And I would, I'm happy to stay on that as representative, but I would be equally as happy if somebody else wanted to assume that role as well.
Okay.
They meet during the day, right? Like at 4 o'clock?
Yeah, it's late, it tends to be later in the day.
Tuesdays still?
For the most part, they're on Tuesdays.
So that's one. I have LPAC down. I love LPAC. I think it's a great group of parents. I enjoy when they have things, meetings and things where I've been able to go, because the parents that are there really, they're looking for information on the school system and looking to have some kind of shared experience of what's been going on. It's a great group. I have had a little more of a challenge this year, just in terms of being as available to them as I would like. And if there was somebody who wanted to do that, they don't have a set schedule, but Jen Suker is great at reaching out to, and it tends to be evenings and very occasional on a Saturday. It's a low commitment. I don't know. Lori, are there things that you're particularly interested in picking up for the remainder of this year, of the ones that we have talked about, or things that, other things?
I mean, there, like, there's not anything of particular interest. I mean, the LPAC one you just mentioned, like, I certainly could try. Like, I think if there are evenings and weekends,
Yeah.
it's preferable. I think anything during the day at this point is really difficult
Yeah.
for my schedule, but,
All right, so I will hand that off to you, if that's okay.
sure.
In terms of planning board, that's Monday evenings. I don't know if there's somebody who would like to pick that up, because that's a particular interest. We could also try to share that a little bit if there's not one person who can commit to Monday evenings.
Is it every Monday?
No, it's every other Monday.
think so.
Roughly, it's, in Irvine Tadaro, I could notify them that we could provide coverage if it's needed,
I mean, you
but
can leave me on that, but I know that it hasn't been like,
it does require that you go to town hall and be sworn in on it, just because it's an official town thing.
you have to be sworn in after you've already been sworn in?
For the Irvine Tadaro,
Okay.
to specifically to be on that committee.
Got it.
All right, so you'll take Irvine Tadaro and then LPAC. Is there somebody who feels like they are interested in doing the HOP Coalition that has that time on Tuesday afternoons? That would be a challenge for me with work.
Challenge for me with work too, unfortunately.
Okay. All right, so can you hold that for now and we'll try to figure out
Sure,
coverage as
yeah.
needed?
You know, like I said, I can do it, it's just, it creates a little bit of a challenge.
Yep. So maybe we could try to share like if you need somebody to cover for you over, do you know what I mean? That you could still be the point person.
Okay.
And if somebody else is able to go occasionally, we do the best we can.
Terrific.
With the planning board piece, the question I have, like, on planning board appropriation, select board, all of those capital improvements, which all, like, have direct impact on our work. What is the, like, expectation of the liaison role? Like, my fear of something like that is that you show up to a planning board meeting and they ask you a bunch of the questions that we were sent, you know, like over email, and there's no way to have all that information at the ready. So like, the question is, what is the expectation of liaison role in those particular committees? Is it to report back what happened in the planning board meeting? Is it to be a resource from the school perspective for the planning board? Like, how do they look at that?
So a couple things, and people can chime in certainly, one is just look at the agenda and see if there's something that's school-specific that you can then, if you want to see if you can get any information, but you don't physically have to be there if there's not something that is relevant, but to kind of follow along,
Yeah.
communicate with whatnot. But, I mean, certainly, some of the planning board questions would require, at least for me, somebody with more expertise on some of the issues and would want to have the ability to go back and forth and not expect to be able to respond in the moment if they haven't provided advance stuff. That would be.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, I think with any of these roles, it's a point person for that board to say, you know, this, we'd like to know this, you could bring that back. Like, but I don't ever feel like I need to, like, it's sustainable green, I don't have to have the answer in the moment. You know, I
Yeah.
share what I know, what is, you know, committee business that we've done, but like bringing back, for example, the concern about the turf. You know, sitting in the meeting, knowing that they have a concern about the turf and PFAS, like bringing that back and saying, hey, just so we know as we're moving forward, that this is on their radar, and really just acting as that connection point, but not having to be an expert witness. That's hard to do in the moment.
Are you interested in that, or do you want to think about it and we can just kind of carry it along for the meantime?
I mean, you know, I could potentially do it. I think that not having, like, being able to actually watch the recorded meetings and report back would be probably easier in some circumstances as opposed to going to all the meetings.
Of
But I'd
course.
like to be in person for some of the meetings, because I think it is interesting. So you can leave me on that one.
Okay. All right.
Do they meet at town hall?
They do typically.
Yeah, I'll look into it. It's clearly I've not been to a planning board meeting.
Okay, the other thing I see on here is the need to disband the campus planning committee. Did we not do that since then? I think we want to put that on a future agenda to disband that.
And do we have to officially remove the Freedom Team liaison role? Or do you think we already did that? I don't recall
I
doing
feel
that.
like, I will reach out to the Freedom Team and see, I feel like there was a reason why
Okay.
there was a shift in that.
Okay. I do want to mention that the Sustainable Green Committee is looking at their charter, and I happened to notice that it did not call for an official school committee liaison,
Oh, interesting.
which they were sort of surprised at too. So I think it's important that we stay connected, so I like having that there. And I did say that when it's not me, it will be somebody else. It is a role that we fill. So, but if you were curious, I think it currently is not an official role, but they may add that in.
That's great. I mean, I'm guessing things have shifted
Yeah,
since they rebanded.
yeah, exactly.
All right. So I don't think that requires an official vote, but just good to know where our coverage is, and we can come back with the piece to disband the other one. That brings us then into the FY '25 budget.
Okay.
Dr. Kavanaugh.
Would you like us to go through all of the slides once more?
So I feel like, I don't personally feel like I need to go through all of the slides, because we have been through them as a group here a couple times now. Do people want to see, do other people feel like you need to go through the slides again, or would like to help inform a vote? We can also have a
I feel
discussion.
like we've seen them.
Yeah, I don't think,
As long as the current version is up on the website still, and, I mean, I think everybody's seen them.
All
All right, would you like to do just your last two slides, Mrs. Rodman, so that we can talk about exactly what those numbers are?
Sure.
Okay. Is that okay?
Mhm.
Okay.
Okay, so I do believe that this is helpful for the committee to hear again and for the community if they are watching. So for the FY '25 budget, putting together both our salary and expenses into these breakout buckets, contractual inflation and current services is 1.8 million. Special education is an increase of 436,000. That includes 3.6 FTEs. Instructional cost and enrollment growth is 715,000, and that includes 2.95 FTEs. Their instructional program enhancements, again, is 0. Administration, support, and facility enhancements increase of 213,000, which includes 2.9 FTEs, for a total increase over FY '24 of 3,207,037, for a total FY '25 budget request of 63,144,790. Breaking that down into percentages, again, contractual inflation in current services represents an increase of 3.07%. Special education is an increase of 0.73%. Instructional cost and enrollment growth, an increase of 1.19%. Administration, support, and facility enhancements, an increase of 0.36%, for a total increase over FY '24 of 5.35%.
You don't need to do the capital plan.
Okay. Any comments or questions before we entertain a motion on the budget? I have not heard, other than what we heard in our meeting last week, I have not received any public feedback on this. I don't know if others have had. Usually, what I have observed in the past is we get feedback when people have concerns.
The only feedback that I had received separately was just concern about the reduction in the SEL director and whether or not, whether or not that would still remain an important focus of the district in terms of social emotional learning. Because I think that the parent that raised it was just saying that it was such a long time pushing to get that role in the first place. But I think that understanding a little bit more about what the plan was for maintaining the programs was helpful, and so that was the direction I had provided in terms of like looking back at the presentation, understand where that piece was going to be covered going forward. But I think, Dr. Kavanaugh, you also, you know, that had come up with the select board as well, as like, well, what happens if it doesn't run the way you do? And I just trust that the administration will then bring that back to our attention, and we can make a different decision in another year if that's not moving in the direction that we need it to.
We will. I do feel like there's good infrastructure in place, but if we find that we need a director, you know, at the central office level again, we will certainly come back to you.
So that's the only feedback I had heard.
And then I also feel like the two new special ed directors who are at the, in assigned to grade levels provide a closer administrative position for some of that, maybe. So I don't know, I think whoever was concerned, I know that SEL is a huge concern for all of us, but I feel like just listening to the programming that we've put in place in the time that I've been sitting here, seems like we've really pushed it from central office. We've organized it, we've given it consistency, and we've pushed it out. So hopefully it is able to be sustained, but definitely needs to be watched.
For as long as I've been here, all 5 school buildings have had SEL goals in their school improvement plans. And it is true that they operated largely as independent contractors. Yeah. So when that was happening, I think they had good SEL programming, but the director has allowed us to make that really cohesive and think about what great programming looks like, especially developmentally, how to get it into the general education curriculum at a tier 1 level. So those pieces, I think, have been very helpful, you know, with her leadership.
I mean, you raise a good point, though. I mean, it's like, I'm proud of the budget that we're bringing forward. I think a lot of thought, careful, difficult decisions were made to keep it to 5.35%. This is not an easy budget to come by. You know, given that 3% contractual obligations doesn't give you much room, as you said, I think last time. So I think we've prioritized what we think is essential. I think we're at a good place. We're the best place we can be at. And there are some sacrifices to get here. I mean, certainly you had a whole slide of asks that we just couldn't fulfill, but thankfully we're able to serve what we need, what we think is really essential. So I'm comfortable with voting this tonight as it is.
I move to approve proposed FY25 budget as presented in the amount of $63,144,790.
Motion by Susan. Is there a second to that?
Second that.
Second by Adam. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed or abstained? Okay, so the operating budget for FY25 passes unanimously. And that brings us into policy FF, naming of facilities or
Okay.
events, and this is a second reading.
Shortly. And this is very timely because we are going to be launching the naming of the Elmwood Replacement School. So the policy working group did take a look at the work that came to us, which I think had been most recently updated in 2013. And there were a couple of changes that we are recommending to you. The first is in the first paragraph, we wanted to add the language that says that the educational space will also be reflective of the community, or the name could be reflective of the community's values, culture, or unique characteristics. And in the second paragraph, we wanted to sort of underscore that what's happening in school districts now is they are moving away a little bit from naming facilities after people. And, you know, we are certainly not opposed to that, but we want people to understand that the school committee is exercising caution about that. So the language in there says, while the school committee exercises caution about naming a facility after a person, a facility space or event, if a facility space or event is to be named after a person, living or deceased, the following criteria should serve as a guide. and there are those criteria in there.
Okay. Any questions on the policy, on the language? Okay. Is there somebody who would like to entertain a motion on that?
I will move for the approval of the policy as amended in the agenda materials.
Okay, thank you. Motion by Lori, is there a second on that?
A second.
Second by Amanda, all those in favor?
Aye.
Any abstain or oppose? Okay, so that is also unanimous, and that brings us into the sixth grade math plans. Mr. LaFave, it's nice to have you here.
Yes, so we have been working very carefully, I think, Mr. LaFave and I, with a whole group of math educators and administrators in the district, and then also teachers at the middle school. And so we've been having meetings up as recently as this morning. As you know, this started as one of my goals in the summer of 2022. And we really wanted to kind of dive into math instruction, especially as it takes place at grade 6, because that's that transitional year. In grade 5, there's a teaming structure and a lot of differentiation, and in grade 7 and grade 8, the kids are actually leveled. And so grade 6 is this kind of funny place, and we wanted to really look at, the curriculum at that grade level. So that gives you just a little bit of the history. So 22 to 24, I've been working on this project. And originally, I thought that in the spring of 2023, we would be ready with answers. And I think that was very naive. In the spring of 2023, we were still mired in questions. So that continued into the 23-24 school year with the promise that we would come to some conclusions that would sort of redirect the instruction of math at the middle school, specifically in grade 6. So we started a lot of research then. We examined a lot of facets of mathematics, but the bulk of the work centered on a singular question: would leveling be appropriate starting at grade 6, because it starts now at grade 7. So we put together a math educational study group. Everybody was on that group. I had to find people who weren't. But there were 3 building principles, because if you make a change at grade 6, it doesn't just impact the middle school, it may impact grade 5, and it may impact the high school. So we had Mr. Bishop, Mr. LaFave, and Mr. Cotter on that group, and other administrators in those buildings were able to attend as well. We had 3 teacher math leaders, 2 special education administrators, 1 math administrator, the assistant superintendent for curriculum and instruction, and we would sit once a month in a room and really dive deeply into math data. And then most recently, we now have individual student data, and I think that what we have, I wish I could just show it to you, but I can't, because it has individual student scores. But every single 6th grader is there. We have their STAR fall scores, their STAR winter scores, whether those scores and growth have gone up or not. We have them grouped by kids who are exceeding expectations, meeting, partially meeting, or not meeting expectations. We have their spring of grade 5 MCAS scores in there. We have the course grade that they received in their math class in the fall. So there's so much data in this spreadsheet that it's really nice in the sense that the individual student data is showing us some trends. And I hope to be able to show you the 30,000-foot view, and then those kinds of views that take us down to almost a kid by kid. So just so you know what our math educational study group did in May of 23, we conducted observations of instruction at Hopkins, because they have a really unique thing going on. They have professional learning communities that are named after national parks teams. But in there are typically 4 teachers, and 2 of them become what we call switch partners. And so if Mr. Lebrad and I were both teachers on a team, we would switch up our kids so that there might be times that I'm teaching math, another teacher's teaching math, there's a paraprofessional involved. And so there are so many adults with so many kids in small groups that we're really able to service math like in a place that is kind of the entry level, or I don't know, that zone of proximal development, I guess, for a kid is what we like to call it in public education. Now, they don't do that every day. There are some days that you just have your 22 kids in math and you're teaching them. But because you have the flexibility of only having 22 kids, you can really move your children around much more differently than say a math teacher at the 6th grade level who teaches 5 periods a day, and it's very carved in stone what period you're teaching which children. So we went and we watched that instruction. We did case study research with 4 students. We really dived into things including their attendance. We chose kids who were not meeting, partially meeting, meeting, and exceeding. We looked at their growth over time, and then one of the 5th grade teachers in the room had been the teacher for all 4 of them. So we could talk about that student in terms of effort and attitude and home life. We really delved, I think, deeply into the case studies. Then we did a lot of subgroup performance MCAS data. So what does our MCAS data look like for our students who are on IEPs, for our ESOL students, for kids who are white, kids who are Asian, however kids identify. Then we did some item analysis work to really think about our curriculum, where are the places where our kids are falling down. We prepared a grade 6 math survey for all of the students to take, and then the last time we were together, we looked at the results of that. So let's start at the 30,000-foot level, and we'll look at it from a historical vantage point. If we take our 2019, 2021, 2022, and 2023 MCAS, in 20 there was no spring MCAS because of the pandemic. So this right here in 2019 still remains our best score, but you can see that there is a nice similarity to what happened in 2023. Here there are 17 kids who are partially or not meeting, and here there are 21. Here there were 31 exceeding and only 24, but there are obviously more in the meeting category. But these bar graphs are starting to look similar, so we feel good about coming back to where we were prior to the pandemic. Those numbers are actually very, very similar. And so then we went back in time, all the way back to 2017, and these are the grade 6 scores in ELA and math, the way DESE delivers them to you. And what we were really focused on were the median SGP scores. So what SGP is, it's your student growth percentile score. So if over time, everyone sitting at this table had the same MCAS history in grade 5, and then in grade 6 we took the MCAS and Susan Rothermick had the best score, and then Jeff, and then me, and then Nancy. What the MCAS does is it rank orders all of those students. So you would be the 90th percentile, 80th, 70th, 60th, 50th, all the way down to Mr. Lefebvre, who might have an SGP score of 10, right? Now, what we like in Hopkinton is for our kids to be 50 or above, right? So then we can say that, what's happening in Hopkinton places our kids sort of in that upper 50%. In 2017, our scores were really terrific. For 8th grade, so this is every single 8th grader taking that test, the median SGP score in math was an 80. That's unheard of. That hardly ever happens in the state of Massachusetts. So that and the 7th grade 75 were things to celebrate. And the 6th grade 65 median SGP was also something to celebrate. 65 is very, very good for all of your kids. 80, as I said, kind of unheard of. So then we broke it down and we took a look at those SGPs by subgroups, and we said, take a look at our students who are identified as kids with disabilities, kids with high needs, kids who are Asian, and kids who are white. And you're probably wondering why those are the only ones for which there are SGPs, and it's simply because if the population, the number of students is under 20, they won't give you an SGP for that group. So you can see that Asian students were at 68 and white students were at 64.5, high needs at 57, and our students with disabilities at 40 in that particular year. If we go to 2018, again, grade 8 and grade 7, 71.6 and 73.8, very good SGP scores, and grade 6 had a 61.3, also a very good score. But in 2018, you can see what's happened here with our SGPs. Our white students are at 60%, our Asian students at 74%, high needs at 51%. And here's a place where our students on IEPs dips to just under 40% in terms of their SGP. So it got us starting to think about are our kids on IEPs, you know, faring well enough? Are they being competitive? And we need to remember that they are not competing against kids with different MCAS cohort profiles. They're competing against other students with those very same profiles all across the Massachusetts, the state. So there could be a kid in Cohasset, there could be a kid in Brookfield, who are exactly the same as a kid in Hopkinton in terms of MCAS profile, and those are the kids that we're competing against. 2019, the median SGP is still above a 50, 62.4, 69.8, 63.7. We're feeling good about that. And then when we look at the SGP, our students with disabilities has bounced back up over 50. High needs 57.5, Asian 70, white 62.5. 2021, this is the pandemic year. I'm not even going to spend a lot of time on this slide. There's no real reason to take a look at it. You can see that our SGPs for students with disabilities, high needs, and white students are all very low in that year. So now we get to 2022. And our SGP score for grade 8 is 66, grade 7 is 68, grade 6 is 61. And so we start to feel like we are in a nice bounce back place, as we could see on those early slides. We have a 71 SGP for our Asian students. These numbers now are big enough so that we're actually starting to get SGP scores, so high needs are 63. This 63 makes up this group right here, so we have a 60 for low income, 75 for Ls and former Ls, and 52 for our students with disabilities.
So, Dr. Kavanaugh, what was the number for white students?
Oh, I'm sorry, 56. All right, so that was our first round of data that we looked at. And one of the things we came away with is just, you know, our students with disabilities keeping up in terms of their peers around the state of Massachusetts. And that was a question for us. We asked our kids a whole bunch of questions on a survey, but some of the pie charts that we thought were interesting to share with you tonight. Do kids feel confident in their math class? So we've got about 21% of them who say, well, I'm not sure about that. But the majority of our kids, a very strong majority of our kids, over 70% of them say that, yes, I am feeling confident in my math class. Very few of them were kids who disagreed or strongly disagreed about that. We asked them if they complete the enrichment problems in class. So in every math class, you have the opportunity to engage in enrichment. The vast majority, again, of our students, here we have about 80% of them say, yes, I'm doing that with regularly or at least sometimes. And about 20% of our kids said, no, I don't ever do the enrichment problems. We asked our kids, do you receive math support outside of school? And that was something that came up in our math working group. Carla Crisafulli, who is the subject matter leader for math at the high school, has done a lot of research with the high school kids, and one of the things she says that correlates directly is if kids have someone to help them with math outside of school, they tend to fare a whole lot better, whether it's a parent, whether it's a tutor, whether it's a neighbor, a sibling, or, you know, they attend like Russian math school, whatever it happens to be, there's a correlation between help outside and kids doing well in school. So we asked if there were kids who were attending something like Russian math or Kumon. 23% said yes. 18% said they have math tutoring. 27.7% or 67 students, I'm sorry, 7.4% get math tutoring, or 18 kids said that. 67 students said that they work on math with someone at home. That's 27.7%. And 126 of our kids, or 52%, about half of them said, nope, there's no one who helps me with math at home.
Sorry, Dr. Kavanaugh, could they answer all that apply, or is it just pick one?
That's a good question.
I mean,
No, they
I
could
go to
have
Kumon
done
and get
all,
tutoring
yes,
and-
you could.
You could do
So a
that,
student
okay.
could be,
Okay.
yes, I go to Russian School of Math, yes, I get math tutoring, yes, someone at home helps me.
Okay.
So the same kid could be in all three of those buckets. And then we also asked kids if they feel like they learn from others in their math class, and about 70% said, yeah, when we're doing things in school and we work with other kids, I feel like I learn from them, and about 30% said, no, I don't think I do. All right, so now this is where we start getting into that data that breaks us down into the 4 buckets: exceeding, meeting, partially meeting, and not meeting. When we administered the STAR test for math with grade 6 students in the winter, so this is about a week ago, we had about 125 kids who landed in the exceeding expectations category, which is wonderful. Any school district would love to have that. And so then we looked at the percentile rank, and the kids who were in the 98th or the 99th percentile nationwide, there were 48 kids. And of those 48 kids, their SGP score was 77. These numbers are extraordinary. So I do think that our kids who are at the highest levels of math performance are making gains, and an average SGP score for 48 kids would tell us that. So then we look at the percentile rank for our kids in the 95th to 97th. There were 23 students there with an average SGP score of 66. Anyone who was in a percentile rank below 95, there were 54 of them, they had an SGP score of, average SGP score of 60. And then we had some kids in this group who said, I am not challenged. And there were 47 of those kids. And of the 47 kids who said, I don't feel like I'm challenged on the survey, their average SGP score was 68. And while the majority of grades for those students were very high for most of these kids, they were getting A's, the course grades ranged from a low of 82 to a high of 100%. So this right here is a screenshot of the first 28 kids in that 125, and I just took a screenshot of those kids at the top. They are not identifiable to anyone. And what we're seeing happening here is you are looking at the color coding for their 2023 spring math MCAS. So of those kids who are all now exceeding expectations, this is where they were in the spring of grade 5. And if we looked at them today, they would all be green E's on this list according to STAR. So we're very proud of the fact that a lot of these kids who in the spring of 2023 had been meeting and now in the winter of 2024 are all exceeding. So we are thinking, that's great. Those boats are rising for sure. Susan, you look like you have a question.
Oh, it's got later.
Okay, all right. So then we took the same things for our kids who are meeting expectations. There were 90 of them. We did percentile rank for 80 to 89. There were 52 kids, 70 to 79, 24 kids below 70. There were 14 kids, and the number of kids who said they didn't feel challenged were 12. And you can see what happens to the average SGPs. It's flattening out a little bit here to 53, 50, 41, and 51. The majority of grades for those students were very high. Most of those kids were getting A's. However, the course grades did range from a low of 66 to a high of 98 in this group. And meeting expectations is exactly where we think kids, should be, really. I mean, they're meeting the benchmark that's prescribed by the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. So if we take our 125 and our 90, we're already at 215 kids who we feel like they're in a very good place for the impending MCAS test in May. So now we look at our students who are partially meeting expectations on the winter STAR math test. There were 47 of those kids, and we can take a look at what has happened to the average SGP. So the average SGP for all 47 of them was 31. When we went to percentile rank from 60 to 69, there were 6 kids, 50 to 59, there were 16, below 50, there were 25, and the kids who said that they just weren't challenged, there were 2 of them. And I mean, that certainly could be. There could be some kids who are in a math class who feel like I could do more if you pushed me a little harder. And we have to remember that that's just a student's perception. So in all of those categories, when we said, do you feel like you were challenged, that's a kid's perception of whether or not, and we even wonder, did every kid read the question correctly? But we like to look at that data. At any rate, I think what's interesting here is now you're actually starting to see what happens, I think, with SGP scores, because I think people believe that SGP scores, if you're in a higher percentile rank, should be higher. But the 50 to 59s have a higher SGP average score than the 60 to 69s, because they're being compared with kids who are in their like cohort, not to the kids who are in another cohort. The majority of the grades were A's with almost as many B's, and course grades ranged from a 61 to 96. But here's an interesting data point for us. So if on this previous slide we said, ooh, are we making progress, adequate progress with our students in partially meeting? We can take a look at their spring of 2023 math MCAS. So these kids were kids who in the spring of 2023, there were 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 who had been meeting expectations, and 1 who had not been meeting expectations, but everyone else was partially. Today, if we recolored this based on STAR data, every one of those would be yellow. So we had 8 kids who were formerly meeting who are now partially meeting. And so it gets us to the place of asking ourselves, are we meeting the needs of our partially meeting expectations students? And I think that this slide and that slide would tell us that more needs to be done for these kids. And then if we take a look at our not meeting expectations, there were 9 kids. And you can see, again, the average SGP score is at 23. 3 of these students are math educated outside of the general education classroom, just so you get a sense of who they are. 3 have A's, 3 have B's, 2 have C's, and 1 has a D. Oops, I think that number has shifted just a little bit just because. No, we're good there, okay. All right, so with all of this, when this first started, I was in a place where I wondered if the students who were in that 98th and 99th percentile, if their needs were being met, if they were feeling challenged. And I look at this and I say, I think there's growth there that says that there probably is a level of challenge for these kids. But I also have looked at grade 7 and grade 8, and if we take a look at the students who are partially meeting, when you begin that leveling process in grade 7 and grade 8, what we start to see is that the kids who are partially meeting start to have better SGP scores. And I think, this is at least our thinking right now, is that if you have 48 students who are in the 98th and the 99th percentiles, and they are in that classroom, they are kids who, and there are a lot of them, a teacher needs to meet those needs as well as someone who is doing math at a 5th grade level. I am not saying that this would be impossible in Hopkinton, because I don't think that it's impossible, because there's good evidence that our teachers are meeting the needs of lots of kids here. But I do think that this is challenging for any math teacher anywhere to meet the needs of kids when the needs are so disparate. So one of the things that I think we know right now is that there is ample evidence that students make greater gains when the disparity in learning within a single classroom is not as wide. That, I think we have data to support that statement. And if it's not just at the 6th grade level, I think we can see that when we look at 7th grade and 8th grade. We are planning to make changes next year to the way that students are grouped in grade 6. I do not have any answers for you tonight about what those groupings will look like. Because when we decide what to call things or which students will be grouped differently, what their learning is going to look like, when we started to see changes in 8th grade with the partially meeting students, what we recognized was that they were in a smaller group. It was co-taught, and they also had what we call in education a double dose. So they had a math lab period in addition to it. So there's something to be said for time on learning, there's something to be said for class size, and there's something to be said for the fact that you can put a general educator and a special educator in a classroom together to help students who really need some kind of targeting. Now, would we put every student who is partially meeting in a classroom like that? We probably wouldn't. Because there are some kids who are at the very high end of partially meeting. They have a particular eagerness and readiness to learn. And those might be kids who, if you put them into a room of very disparate learners, would be those boats that would be able to rise. So we have a lot of figuring to do about scheduling, course naming, who goes where. And I don't think that this is so now we simply restructure and put kids in different places. But I think that we are still going to have classes where there is a continuum of learners because it's good for kids. And I think that in those places, we know that instruction will start to look a little bit different. Well, I shouldn't say, I'll say a little bit different from the way it looks today, because I think our sixth grade teachers have made incredible gains in differentiating instruction over the past couple of years. They've done a really nice job. So the last star says that right now we are working with teachers and administrators across 3 buildings to determine what all of this is going to look like. I am happy to come back to the committee when we have all of that ironed out and really define it for you. But that's where we are right now. It may feel nebulous in terms of the language, but I think that we as educators have a good sense of what kids need right now. I don't know if you want to add to that, Mr. Lefebvre.
Yeah, I guess I'll add, it has been a lot of work over a long period of time, but it's a thoughtful team that's looking at it, and the things that we've learned about students over the last year and a half, they're already impacting the practice in the classroom. So there are, as you talked about, changes in differentiation taking place already. So it has been a long time, but we're definitely making thoughtful decisions based on the data that we're seeing.
Yes. On the screen, I do have a thank you, because as Mr. Lefebvre just said, there have been so many people involved in this process, and it hasn't been just a couple of hours here or there. We had so many people who are helped to gather data, conduct research, engage in so many meetings. I would like to shout out to those sixth grade team of teachers. They have been so thoughtful in their instruction, in their work with kids, in their meetings with all of us. And they are exceptional educators. And I think that when we start to look at curriculum and grouping, because they are incredibly amazing, talented, expert teachers. So I think that some of the changes that we are going to make are going to be great for our kids. And I would also like to thank our person who is our middle school ELA director, because she's also sort of a data expert. And when we have put all of this data together, I should not say we put it together, because she has spent the last 10 days putting immense amounts, crazy amounts of data into spreadsheets so that we can really look hard at every individual learner in grade 6. Every single kid is so valued. And so when Mr. Labrade tells us all the time that all really can mean all, I feel like we are in a place where more so than ever, all really means all. Mm-hmm. We're really excited, I think, even for scheduling this year, because when we build schedules, we can really cohort kids in ways that we've never been able to do before. It's awesome.
I'm just curious, a couple of points that came up that just sort of sparked a question in my mind was we talk about looking at the data of those students that are getting sort of outside extracurricular assistance, and now we have enough of a data set to be able to sort of break down the cohorts further. So economic challenge or however it was worded. I'm interested to learn, is there a correlation between those students that are financially challenged and the scores that they're coming up with? And my suspicion is that yes, those students that are getting that extra help outside are the higher achiever ones. And so is it really, are we talking about an economically disadvantaged because student A can afford to have the extracurricular help, where student B, for any multitude of reasons, doesn't have that same advantage?
So I'm going to answer that in the way that I have a lot of colleagues over my lifetime who have taught in school districts where there is, a lot of lack of privilege. And one of the things that they will say is, you can't stop families from seeking additional math support outside of school, but we can never hang our hat on, the fact that kids are socioeconomically disadvantaged, right? So we have to take a look at every kid who falls into that category and think about, do they have what they need? And if a student needs a social worker to be successful, or a hotspot to be successful, or a double dose of math, we are going to make sure that kids are getting those things.
Yeah, I mean, I always wonder about is, what's the correlation between that and what, that's information, but what do we do about it?
Right, yes. And I think some of those subgroups that we looked at earlier, some of once you got to the high needs where they were actually breaking it down because we had enough students who were socioeconomically disadvantaged to make a cohort, I think the SGP score there, and of course, it's a median SGP score with DESE, so it was at 60, which I think is a very good median SGP score. But we have to remember that if there are 20 kids who are making up that cohort,
Right.
they are all individual learners.
Thank you.
Other questions?
No, he voiced my concerns. Very much was concerned about us making up the difference when they can't get the outside.
I had a couple questions. One is, when we're talking about the partially met expectations, I know parents get the report on MCAS. I'm not aware, and maybe I haven't been paying close enough attention, if the STAR data is reported back to parents in the middle school years, just in terms of, would a parent know, other than watching a child's grades, if their child was struggling on the STAR and partially meeting expectations on that track through the school? And I guess,
Right, so we don't actually give a parent the entire STAR report. We primarily use that as an instructional tool internally. There are times, however, I know when a teacher or a school counselor may call home and say, we have some concerns about math instruction. And I'm sure that, those kinds of things are surfacing, especially like at the elementary level. We do this all the way from K to grade 10. So that's the kind of trajectory we have, I think, just in terms of data. The one time when we do report home is we now are required by law, and we've been doing it even before we were, to do the dyslexia screener. We use a STAR product for that, and that we are required to report home.
couple things. One is, you were talking about the co-taught math and there being a special educator and a general educator in the classroom. My understanding is that to be in co-taught math does not require an IEP or any specialized diagnosis more so than, is that accurate, or is that?
There may be some IEPs that would say that a student would benefit from a supported class, so there could be a math teacher and a special educator, or a math teacher and a paraprofessional in there. But there are some times when we think that there are students who could benefit from a co-taught setting.
Okay, that's more what I was getting at, is are there other students able to access that need it, that may not have an identified disability? Then the final thing is more of a comment than a question. I think the focus on what to name these things is really important at this age. I know, and those who have had kids go through the middle school, that it becomes a conversation among peers where they're waiting to see what math level they're placed in, and I think that can be stigmatizing in some ways, and I don't know that there's a way to totally avoid that, but.
Well, and one thing we have talked about is if we take a look at this and we say, we want there to be some kind of flexibility. So there's a supersonic challenging grade 6 math class, for example, and it's October, and I feel like, and my teacher feels like, I could handle that level of challenge, then we want kids to be able to move within those classrooms. Because we don't want grade 6 to end up being a determinant of what ends up happening to a student for the rest of their math life in the Hopkinton Public Schools.
I love
That's
that.
what my question
Yeah.
was, because that has been long discussion for years and years, both on the committee and just among parents, about when your child gets placed in a certain level in 7th and 8th grade, can they ever get out of it? And there does become a time where it becomes very difficult to move into a new track.
Yes.
So my concern making another track even earlier is, does that start to pigeonhole it even earlier? And it's gonna be really important for parents to understand that that's not the case and not the intention. So that would be one of my probably primary comments on the situation is like, people don't wanna feel like if sixth grade is determining what AP course they can take in high school. But the other part of it that I was thinking about is in relation to what we were talking about last week with sixth grade moving down to the Hopkins school, what impact does this have in that setting and moving into that building? And I don't know if you know the answer to that yet, but that would be a question I would have for future discussions about it.
We've asked that question. We have not answered that question.
Comments?
Yeah.
Yeah. I thank you so much for doing this analysis, first of all. I think this was on your goal, as you said last year, and I knew you had said to the committee you wanted more time to do it right. And so I think the level of rigor for the analysis really is kind of doing it right. I really appreciate that because it's very telling. Like, I think initially, and I personally still retain an interest in supporting the top learners as well. I think, we are often, think they're fine because they're doing fine, but they need to be continually challenged. And I personally think in middle school, it's a developmental time where it can feel awkward to be smart, and finding a class, a cohort where you can be smart with your peers and kind of, if you love math and you have an intuitive sense for it and you really enjoy it and you can go further, having the freedom in a classroom where you can do that, I think is really important for those learners. Seeing the data, I am very concerned about the partially meets. Those SGPs are very low. And for me, that's a new learning. I wasn't aware of that gap, so really happy that we know that gap is there. But I don't want to lose track of supporting both ends, because I think, one of my questions is, as you're designing on the third star there, how we move forward, what are your objectives? What are you trying to accomplish in the design? Now that we see what we see, what do you hope to accomplish with the new design? Is it supporting the partial meets? Is it allowing those who are ready to be, able to sort of come together and have teaching at their level? And I think also, I'd love to see again the math pathways, to know, like, in sixth grade, are we talking about going deeper in the curriculum of sixth grade, which is what I think we're talking about, or are we talking about accelerating to something different than the curriculum of sixth grade? So that's a whole lot of questions, stacked them right up there, but I'll throw it back to you both.
Sure. So I do think that in order to give our kids exactly what they need, I think that the model that we have right now with that big gigantic continuum doesn't quite work. And I think that because if we go back and we look at the numbers of kids, we said we had 215 students who were meeting or exceeding, but we also had 125 kids who were exceeding the standard. So if we have, sort of 3 different teams, right, that means we're going to have like 41, 42 kids on every one of those teams who are kids who are in that, exceeding the standard. And that also means that we're only going to have about 10 kids who are in the partially meeting. So I think when you take those partially meetings and you mix them in with, like, so inordinately, disproportionately, with a bunch of kids who have a grasp on the material, then it becomes really challenging for you to be a partially meeting kid who's willing to put up your hand and say, but wait, I still don't get it. I wonder if that's a feeling that some of those students are having in that setting. Because in 7th and 8th grade, when we start to level and we start to take off that 98th or 99th percentile, I'll call them that, but the way we group those kids is far more complex than that. But let's imagine that those 48, or, in the current grade 5 class, I think there are 357 students, which means if you were taking about 20% off the top, we're really talking about like 75 kids, yeah. So, yep. So, I think yes to both of those things. I think that we're gonna really concentrate on how to get to the Parsley meetings and what to do with those kids who are at the tippy top. And if you had 75 kids, it would be very easy to make a class on each one of those teams. It just would.
So,
Can I respond?
Yeah, please do.
I think with thoughtful cohorting and grouping, there's an opportunity through design to improve the experience for both ends of the spectrum and everyone else across the continuum. It just needs to be done super thoughtfully, because the best thing about sixth grade is climate and culture and what it feels like to be a new middle school student and all of the excitement that comes along with that. So as we work towards wherever we land with those thoughtful cohorts, that's my primary concern, is that students might lose that feel, and you use the word stigmatizing, but you gotta build academic confidence. That's why that question is in there, particularly in math for all students. Also, you know, a lot of our students go home and they hear like, oh yeah, I wasn't great at math either, and we gotta try to change that narrative for the benefit of our kids. So if they're in thoughtfully designed cohorts, they can build confidence, and I agree, at that level, it cannot determine their math trajectory for the rest of their academic career here in Hopkinton. So.
Well, if you build it at the bottom, the confidence, then later on, they're gonna take off on their own. But having been one of those not very good at math, even though I was in a classroom of 30 or 25 to 30 kids for 6 years, the same kids, somehow I missed out on something there. And was, that's just so incredibly important to get that to them.
I like the idea of making it not such a wide group in the sixth grade. I do share what Lori's, just because the way the math pathways have been, it's very early on that it's determined that a kid, for example, can't make it to BC Calc, and then it can't make it to the AP AB Calc, and then they're not gonna make it to calculus. And like, it's difficult to move, by the time you're in eighth grade, I know, to move to a higher trajectory. It's easier to go down for kids who have found that they can't continue to accelerate. I know, I like the idea of what you had said about some potential fluidity between them. And I know that we used to have level sixth grade math back when my oldest was going through sixth grade. And it provided a lot of great opportunities, I think, for different levels. But I know that was a concern that people had, was that the trajectories, but also about sixth grade brain not being maybe blooming to the point where it's gonna be, that they may be the kid that's gonna take off and be really accelerated in math, but they're not quite there yet. In another year, 2, 3, they might be that kid. So to the extent that we're able to allow kids to progress through and not stick them in one peg.
And I don't want to make it sound like I'm opposed to it, because it's not that. I think actually where I'm coming from is more on the social emotional component of it for the kids, because I have an 8th grader and I have a 10th grader. They are very different math students. And I have a 5th grader who also is a very different math student. And the concern I have is the pressure that they put on themselves to be in one of those classes. It's not necessarily, like, what we try to talk about at home is everybody has a different brain, everyone learns differently, just like you have different abilities in sports and you have different abilities with the arts. It doesn't mean you don't try and do your best in whatever subject that is. But my concern is there's high achievement in this district and high stress that comes with that. And are we bringing that down a grade by doing that? That's my biggest concern, not the are we gonna be servicing the students properly? I think all of the homework you've done on it sounds excellent, and it would be a better experience. It's how we message it with the kids, how you message it with the parents, so that they are appropriately advertising it at home too, because I think some of that pressure starts to trickle down, and that's actually my big because I've just witnessed it. You know, I witnessed my 8th grader being disappointed that he missed it, and it wasn't us being disappointed. I was like, you got properly placed where your teacher thought you should be, and take it for what it is. And so, like, that piece is where my concern comes from.
Jack, you look really, really intensely, and I'm wondering what you were thinking.
Well, so I currently take BC Calculus at the high school, and I know that's one of like the top classes that they offer. And oftentimes I've thought like, if it wasn't for my certain grade on the Iowa test in 7th grade, like would I be able to be in like the same position? Because like I look at classes that are academically like honors that are below like AP, and they're learning like the same material, and kids are doing just equally as well on it. And it has made me wonder at times like whether or not the certain placement in 7th grade could affect like where you wind up. But I believe that kids that like want to pursue engineering or will pursue like some mathematics in college, they find a way through high school that it's much easier to sort of apply yourself in those situations. So like you can't really move up in a class or go to a higher math level, but you can like become more involved within that same math level, which will give you an advantage once you get to the, say, like AP Calculus or honor statistics, like whatever you're taking. So yeah.
I think I think messaging is key, and I think a lot of the thinking about, well, what if I can't get to BC Calc? I think it's sort of a strange way to think about it, because it's really like you just need to be served where you are as a learner, and you know, having 2 kids now graduated, I can say that lots of kids who weren't in BC Calc go on to engineering and, you know, take calculus in college. It's perfectly fine. Like what is perceived as, you know, career limiting somehow because you didn't get a certain class doesn't really mean that. So.
But I think the challenge, though, is to the kids, that's the way they see it. That it's, I can remember last spring, I had a 7th grader, and I came home from work, and she wanted to know if I had checked my email because the math leveling had come out. All the kids had discussed it. I hadn't, I mean, I'd been at work, I wasn't checking my personal email for looking for that, and it wasn't, I mean, at that age, the kids are thinking that they're and they may not be thinking specifically about BC Calc, but there are, you know, I think there is an awareness in, I think, the messaging and how we help our kids to feel like that this is where they want to be is important. But I do think that pressure they have on themselves is real, and it would be great to help reduce that, but I think that is a larger cultural piece within the district of a lot of intense pressure even at younger ages, and it's, I think, largely it seems to come from the kids, from the parents that I know. I mean, I do think there's something in Hopkinton that's not just the kids, but.
Yeah. This is the last thing I'll say on this topic, I promise. But when we did our case studies, and I had said we chose a kid from the red, the yellow, the blue, and the green, and all of the kids in our case study were kids who came into Hopkinton either in kindergarten or 1st grade and have been with us ever since. The scores that you see on the screen right now belong to a student who came to Hopkinton in grade 1, and in grade 4, on the 2021 iteration of the MCAS, that student was not meeting expectations. The lowest score you can get on the MCAS is a 440, and that student got a 444. And then in 2022, that student went to a 471, and that's when 470 is the cusp for partially meeting expectations, so the person was 1 point into partially meeting. And then this student went up to 482. So now the student is 18 points from proficiency. And in the year that the student got the 482, that student's growth percentile score was a 90. So it was interesting because I said, I'm just going to choose these kids randomly. And when I brought this particular student to the group, they were like, oh my gosh, that kid needed a lot of attention. And I think what this trajectory shows us is that we're prepared to give kids the attention when we have like the right resources and spaces for them. Because I know that this is a kid who got a lot of one-to-one work to get that student to that place. It's just a matter now of knowing all of those kids and cohorting them. But that's exciting data for us.
I think it's great work that you have looked at all the data and moving towards something concrete. So I love the enthusiasm. I'm not sure that I would think to myself, scheduling is an exciting piece, but I'm glad that it is to you.
Jack, did you have leveling in 6th grade or no?
Not in 6th grade. It started in 7th grade with pre-algebra, I believe, was like the first sort of leveling experience that we had.
'Cause my older son had leveling so in 6th grade. It's gone so many different directions. And my younger son didn't have any leveling, I don't think, until a weird makeup thing between 8th and 9th. I don't know.
I remember that
That
year
was-
because
yeah.
they changed the entire math track.
They did, and they learned algebra over the summer. It was really weird. But
I do remember that.
so you'll come back to us with,
I sure will. Yep.
when you come back, would you please bring the pathways? So we
Oh,
can see
sure.
like
Yeah,
where
yeah.
6th grade feeds into, you know, what the options are in 7th grade.
Yes.
How this sort of,
There's a new AP course in the high school right now.
AP
if you
pre-calc.
pre-calc, right?
Yes. And we like that because that's one of those stops on the bus where if you weren't in, the accelerated course in grade 7 and grade 8, that stop on the bus can get you to where you want to be.
Yep.
So it's really nice.
Right. Great, thank you.
Sorry.
And thank you, Mr. LaFave, for coming out. I know, busy week. I understand there's a big night tomorrow night at the middle school.
You bet, 8th grade dance.
All
Thank
right,
your people. They've worked hard.
thank you. That brings us into the procedure for the new school building.
Okay. So in accordance with policy FF, which you just voted, 60 days prior to the naming of any facility, you have to make a public announcement of your intent to name what is currently known as the Elmwood Replacement School. So our goal is to make sure that we do that tonight, and then 60 days forward is March 14th.
I was
if
gonna
I'm doing
calculate it on my
math
calendar.
correctly. I think that is correct. So tonight, we make our public statement that that's what we're going to do, and then in the next couple of days, Georgette and I will make sure that that information is released to lots of local news media. We could even ask the town to send something out, through their listserv. We can also do that from central office. And then what we're going to ask people to do is to come up with suggestions.
Are you also in getting the suggestions going for getting the kids to produce suggestions too?
We will
for the
absolutely
building?
ask the kids to do that as
Okay.
well. Yes, yes.
Spread the word, Jack.
That's your job, to spread it to all around.
So at our first regular meeting, following this initial announcement, members of the community can come here and make their suggestions publicly. If anyone just sends them into the central office or sends them to the school committee chair, we will let everybody know what they are. And that date would be February 1st. We will go through that process one more time on February 15th. So at that point in time, we should have a listing of every single one of the suggestions. What they did with the marathon school, I know, is they took all of the suggestions and Dr. McLeod had put it out in a Google form and said, tell us what your first choice is, tell us what your second choice is. Ultimately, what will happen is by the time we get to March 14th, I can present to you the list of all of the suggested names. I will present to you a recommendation from me. But ultimately, you as the committee will be making that choice, and it will have to be after the date of, on or after 3/14.
Great. Excitement ahead.
Everyone's looking like, oh.
Well, is that a written procedure?
Uh,
There, do you have the dates written out, or could we post the dates on the website?
I can certainly have Georgette do that, yes, yes. This is just my scribbled on copy of the,
And it would be
Policy.
great if we could send something out by listserv. Like, either if it can get out tomorrow, that's great. If not, on Monday, like early before our meeting, if they want to come and do it on the, well, actually, we got a whole other week because the first isn't next week.
right, yes. Yep.
But well enough in advance so people can think about it and then maybe get something out to at least the middle and the high schools.
Yes, definitely. Sure.
Anybody else on that procedure?
I'm a little worried about what's gonna happen to the Elmwood Eagle. Cubby made it to
Cubby-
Marathon,
Cubby
so.
went, yeah, Cubby went in spite of the name change. I guess Center School didn't really have
Yeah.
something that feels like it goes with it. All right. That brings us into the superintendent's mid-year formative evaluation and goals update.
Okay. I know that you've had a long time to look at these, and they usually take us a very long time to go through. So I will read the goal, and then we can kind of briefly go through the evidence provided, and if you have questions, would that be okay? All right. So the first goal was, in the 22-23 school year, I introduced a math student growth and achievement goal. After a year's work, I believe the goal should be extended for a second year to ensure math instruction from K to 12 is cohesive. I think you just saw all of the stuff that's on the work to date slide, pretty much. All right, oop, there's the number corner. No, I said, I used those pictures. Now I remember where I put them. All right, goal number 2, because the 2023 MCAS data has not yet been released, and because I wanted to disaggregate the data by subgroup to assess gains on the goal from 22 to 23, this year I wanted to maintain the student achievement goal focused on writing curriculum, instruction, and assessment, notably at the secondary levels. I linked in an example of the kind of deeper dive that I wanted to make with the goal. So the ELA MCAS data has been extensively analyzed at the middle school and high school level. The person who put together all of the data for the math also did that for ELA at the middle school. And you know that Sarah Ellum, who's at the high school, does an amazing job also of looking at that. I think when we started to look at what was happening with that, we saw that a lot of our kids who were meeting expectations were moving into exceeding expectations. And I think that that's one of the natural byproducts of that disciplinary literacy stuff that we are doing there. So there's just a lot more opportunity, I think, for reading and writing, and we're looking at common assessments and the instruction that we are using in those two places, and I think that it's starting to work. Here's the link to the MCAS annual comparisons. Twice annually, I meet with the high school SMLs, ELA, Science, Social Studies, because those are places where we like to embed more reading and writing. So you can sort of see some of the data that I had for discussion with those folks, and you can also see Mr. Labrad's MCAS presentation. Ensuring that common writing assessments were developed last year, and that they are employed this year with fidelity. And I know that grade 6 to 8 now have common assessments that are developed. Every single teacher has done a beginning of year benchmark. They've done all grade 6 informational paired text. Grade 7 and 8 have thematic lit analysis based on short story when they're starting out. So that's really kind of helping us to understand also where kids are in terms of like immediate assessment, in addition to things like the STAR. And then asking the directors, 6 to 8 ELA and 6 to 12 special education, to analyze STAR growth, especially for subgroups. I know that Nicole Murray, who is our 6 to 8 special education person, and Julie Mattson, who's our 6 to 8, and Sarah Ellums, who are 9 to 12, have been working very closely to look at that data, whether it happens to be STAR data or MCAS data or local assessments. They can take a look at where our kids are, and they have identified places where we know we need to start teaching a little bit harder. And again, I think that those places are not dissimilar from the math. We know that in those partially meeting expectations, I tell people all the time that if we want kids to grow as readers and writers, they gotta just keep doing more and more reps. And I think we started to do that with our meetings and exceedings. And now we just have to have the belief that our kids who are partially meeting expectation can do that. The third goal, it's my second student achievement goal, focused on the co-teaching model as they apply to Hopkinton Middle School. Ultimately, special education students' growth and achievement scores, as well as the Athena report, were drivers for the goal. I don't think it's a secret that our kids who are partially meeting expectations, when we took a look at the math student growth percentile scores, they lagged. And we've been talking, I think, in this setting for a long time about having our special education students rebound to where they were pre-pandemic. So that's been a lot of the work. Mrs. Murray has put together a math learning matrix and a language-based matrix. And what that does is it takes a look at the profile of an individual kid, and it says, does this student need a math lab? Does this student need a co-taught class? If so, why do they? If they are a, partially meeting expectations student, what is it that would say we can put that student into a general education unsupported classroom? So we did not have that for placement before, and it was very difficult, I think, to place our kids in both ELA and math, especially at the middle school. So now with these matrices, we're in a much better place. And now that we are doing that work with co-teaching, so one of the things, and I'll be very honest, we've been doing walkthroughs, and I think walkthroughs are on the list here. And lots of times when we still go into co-taught classrooms, you see that the person who is responsible for teaching English is the main teacher in that room. And the person who is the special educator is the person who is like, for lack of a better term, like a Miss Runner-Up kind of person in the room. We are trying to get that to the place where that space is owned by both of them, that if you were a student, you might not know who the English teacher was and who the special educator was. Because that's when you know that we're doing things like parallel teaching and both of those people are delivering the same content, but maybe in different ways. This way for the kids who need it that way, and this way for the kids who need it that way. And that the flexible grouping just keeps going, and that all 6 co-teaching models are used, I think, with some kind of equity in the room. That, you'll probably see this goal come back next year, because we are, I think, in midstream in terms of helping our teachers with the co-teaching model. Yeah, I think a lot of these things have been done. Getting all the spreadsheets together, conducting all of the walkthroughs. But you know that we are still in a place of growth on this one. It's going to be interesting to see what happens with our MCAS scores in the spring. Goal number 4, last year my goal in this realm was to begin work of aligning and merging the district's work in diversity, equity, inclusion, and social justice, culturally responsive practices, and social emotional learning. Because we had all of that kind of going on, and I think people were living kind of on islands. And all of that work really does intersect and overlap. And if we don't define the ways in which that's going to happen, we have a lot of people, I think, who are spinning their wheels or who are engaging in redundancies. The other thing that's part of this is continuing to grow the CPAC and the LPAC, and I'll talk a little bit about that now. I continue to put in here some of the things that both I meet with Jen Suker and with Abby Hanscom to talk about the things that they're doing. CPAC has had an event every single month of this school year. They're hosting all kinds of informational sessions at the library. And I think that the relationship between, Abby and the schools and the CPAC is really coming along. Jen Suker has also done a couple of really nice family events, and the next thing that she's doing, she's been working with her LPAC board, and they're going to have a day, it'll be held at the high school, but it will cover pre-K all the way to 12, where if you are a family who may not be all that familiar with the American system of education, you can come in and ask questions. Tell me about a standards-based report card. Tell me about what happens on a snow day. I mean, everything will be covered in that session. So we have administrators, how do I engage in Power School? What happens if there's a change that I need to make in Power School? How do I access the handbook? What if I want to fill out a bullying report? All of those kinds of things will be covered on that day. It started out as a small thing, but it has grown pretty big over time. We now have a very serious statement of cultural proficiency, and we have structural review feedback that came to us through Blackprint, and we have enacted a lot of that. One good example is the Equity Lens tool that Mr. Lebrad really did do an awful lot of work on. But I think that the CRIOP is a place where social justice, cultural responsiveness, all of those things kind of come together, and I'm very pleased with our choice to use that document, or that tool, I should call it. Our SEL director now has the HSA administered at least twice a year. We're in our second year of that, and we are now working with our counseling staff to be able to say, okay, here's a kid who looks like they need some work with assertiveness. How are we going to support that student? We've done case studies with that group as well. And, some of the things that we've looked at is, here's a kid who is a super high achiever, a straight A kind of a kid who is exceeding expectations every single year. And then when we got the HSA data, we thought, here is a kid who has really some SEL issues that need to be attended to. And we're looking at that almost through the same lens of when we do reading work and we say, all right, here's a kid who needs some tier 2 reading instruction. We can say, here's a kid who needs some tier 2 support in SEL. And we know that because of the HSA data survey data. This morning, the Metro West Adolescent Health Survey folks had a meeting, and I attended that, and that information will be coming out in March, which helps us to make some decisions around mental health and staffing, and then the vocal data will also be coming out through DESE. So we have a lot of data now that we never had before, and it's been really nice to have our SEL person be able to dive into that. Last summer, we presented on our use of the CRIOP at the MASS conference. So there was Jen Suker. Jen Suker, Mr. Lebrad, one of the people from Blackprint, Colin Rose, and us, and I, and it was pretty great. So we are continuing our work in K-5 PBS, continuing to train our faculty and staff in restorative practices. Thankfully, we had the $100,000 grant, so we can bring someone in to do that work after school, on Saturdays, on school vacations, and we're able to pay teachers, a fair wage to come in if they wish and get it at that point in time, because we all know there's hardly any free time for professional learning in school districts. HR is continuing to diversify our workforce. I know Kim has attended a few sessions with the state. It's always hard to do that because you're doing it through attrition. But again, I will start to look through, some of that state data that we get on those metrics. It used to be in our district that we were about 98% white. I know we moved the needle a little bit and got to 94%. But that covers all of our staff. So I know people will say, well, how many of those folks are paraprofessionals or teachers or cafeteria workers or custodians or administrators? And I think that's important information for us to kind of keep data on. And then culturally responsive and inclusive practices and extracurriculars. One of the things that we've just done in our bullying prevention and intervention revision, Susan thankfully is on my team. We also have Ricky Andrade, and all of our coaches will be getting some training in bullying prevention and intervention every year if you want to be a coach in the Hopkinton Public Schools.
That's
So
fabulous.
yeah. All right, goal number 5, continue to address enrollment growth and ultimately building use and expansion throughout the district. It'll be especially critical to educate the community between now and the November special town meeting about enrollment, academics, SEL needs. And while the construction aspects of the work require a partnership with the Assistant Superintendent for Finance and Operations, Mrs. Rothmick, and Director of Facilities, Mr. Persons, the enrollment numbers and educational needs are going to need to be articulated frequently and with transparency. I feel like this is the one that you see me do an awful lot, whether it's, special town meeting or how many times we talk here about enrollment or when we present the budget or at ESBC2 meetings. These are all very, very public, I think, things that happen. And so I don't know if, and I'm really proud of the work that the ESBC2 did in getting a $151 million price tag down to $91 million. And as you know, we've got a lot of work to do with Hopkins. And I know, Amanda, you had said it would be nice to be able to put a price tag on the FTEs, and we've been working on that as well. So maybe that will be the superintendent's report for next time. Goal 6 is the shared, I'll begin a shared vision goal that emerges from an indicator. The focus of the goal will be to analyze the Hopkinton experience, our offerings alongside student experiences in our district to ensure that kids are prepared for whatever lies ahead, college and career, civic engagement, community contributions, and responsible citizenship. We, as you know, have Dr. Judy Martin doing some work. She was just recently in communication again with the high school staff to see if there are things that they want to know about their instruction so that she can ask the class of 2023 that information, or the questionnaire should be going out not too far off in the distance because we're already in January. Periodically surveying parents and students regarding their learning and social emotional experiences. The Promoting Good report has been received, and we engaged in that with the town, so we have a lot of good feedback from that. And right now, I am currently working with 2 non-college track students who are willing to participate in some case study research with me. I will keep badgering a couple of the others, but I'm learning some very interesting things from them about that sort of pressure you feel, and about feeling, you know, one will say I felt very okay with making a choice that was different because I really have felt comfortable in my own skin. And another one would say I really felt uncomfortable about making the choice that I did. So it's interesting work. Looking at the results of the equity audit, and the RFP has been out there. Has that, have we hit the closing day on the RFP
No, next
yet?
week.
Next week. We're getting close. And in engaging in a district-wide climate team, we have been meeting on Fridays. Our next meeting is a week from tomorrow, and we will be preparing a survey to be sending to the entire district at that point in time. I know I shared with you the rolling agenda, but we have things that we're calling low-hanging fruit, things that our building principals are doing in every building to just say, let's bolster the morale here. And then we also have, like, these are our big ticket items, and what do we need to do as an entire district? The district climate team obviously leading the way. And that work, when we first started, felt like, what's this gonna look like? But I'm telling you, it's been really engaging and kind of exciting to do the work. I met with Carla Burley today. We've got the surveys in good places. We promised our district climate team that we would hand those surveys over to them tomorrow, so they have a week to review them before we get together, put the finishing touches on them, and send them out. So they should be going out next week. Again, my case study kids, and then review the civics curriculum for grades 8 and 11. I'm working on that with Mr. Lebrad. Already attended a DESE workshop on what will that look like. And then just continue the work with Jen Sugar to make sure that our kids whose needs are really diverse. So some of our socioeconomic kids, our kids who have, you know, families with language needs. There are some who, all kids have needs, but some have needs. And so we want to make sure that we are ensuring that our kids who have sort of really serious needs are having those needs met, whether it means that we have a social worker or someone to sit down with them and help them actually through the registration process online, because it can be tricky. It can be tricky if you're not a native speaker. So that's the kind of work that we're doing there. And goal 7, a 360-degree assessment of district climate. I just talked a lot about what that climate group is doing. And we had, you can look at the request to participate, our first meeting, our rolling agenda, the low-hanging fruit and all that. The entire admin team sat down. We did our, sort of first draft of how would we do a self-rating? What do we think of the budgetary process? What do you think of the leadership team? All of that kind of stuff. Ourselves as instructional leaders, and that felt pretty good. So that is in their hands, and next week is the week that we sit down and finalize that draft. I know you have it in its, I'd like to say closer to done iteration. Yeah. All right, and I think that's about it on that one. But I will certainly come back at the end and present on the district climate team and see where we are.
So, just for folks at home, that the formative piece of the evaluation is the mid-year check-in. It's a verbal conversation that we have. Certainly, people could provide you
Sure.
email or whatnot, but the process at the end will happen before the committee has elections in May, so that the committee that is here working and watching the work that's being done on the goals has the opportunity to be able to actually evaluate on those, since we're more familiar than people coming in with the work that's been done this year. I know I probably say this every year, but it is a kind of an awkward process to be evaluated in public. I would think you always do it very gracefully. I am also always impressed with the amount of work, not just that goes into each of these goals, but the amount of work that goes into reporting and presenting the evidence to us. So that's my piece.
I have a question on goal 6.
Goals.
First of all, you have too many goals. I think in
Yes.
in future years, we need to go back to, I think this is a lot of goals for one superintendent, personal opinion, but goal 6, I guess the point of goal 6 was looking at all students, including those not heading necessarily to college, but other pathways. So I guess I was wondering, I don't think I saw in here anything about CVTE education or mentorships, and I feel like we had some momentum behind that a few years ago.
There's a
And
grant.
There was a grant, which helps with momentum, the money, but I didn't know where we were with that and forging relationships with businesses for, I know there's an expanded senior project this year, but just, could you comment on that, or do you think that'll be part of your evidence?
I will let my colleague who's been doing the work comment.
Thank you so much. Yes, so you might recall a few weeks back, you accepted a grant from DESE, which we called the MyCap grant. And what we'll be doing this spring with that funding from the state is using it to kind of shore up all that. So we've got so many great things happening in different corners of the district. How can we make them all make sure that they're rowing in the same direction, that students have access to them in a uniform way, that there's some equity amongst different opportunities, and probably most importantly, how can we make it so that they're sustainable, so that from year to year they're rinse and repeat.
Great.
You know, a couple of things I didn't talk about there too is I have been meeting once monthly with all of the middle school and high school counselors. And you know, the middle school counselors are in a place where they really talk about our kids developmentally, and making sure that kids kind of stay on those, like sort of on the right track and getting kids what they need. So they have something called, you know, ARC, and this is an opportunity for kids to go and during the school day, if they have work that they just, you know, sometimes we call them like 8 to 2 kids that just are not performing outside of school for whatever reason. And so we want to make sure that they have an opportunity to complete homework assignments or to get things that are maybe longer projects done, and so that happens during the regular school day for them. But one of the things that I hear repeatedly from the high school counselors is that stress and that pressure, and it's got to be okay to say, I am not going off to a 4-year college next year. Ta-da! Like, that's got to be okay. And that's a big piece of work for them.
So I think the key, well, I don't know, on one person's opinion, but I think having a plan for everybody is important. But that plan can be very different from one person to another. Like, not college doesn't mean nothing. It
Right.
means just a different plan, and getting excited about what excites you and where you can bring your talents. I think that's great.
Yeah.
I like that. It's a lot. It's a lot.
Any other questions or comments on this?
My only comment was what Amanda and Nancy had already said about 7 goals is a lot. In fact, like I would say, just like in private industry that I'm in, if you have more than 3, they're like, you don't have, like, it's basically saying if you have more than 3, then you don't have any priorities because you're all over the place. So, I mean, I applaud how much you've done for all of the 7 that you have, because that's spreading quite thin. I think the other piece that I wonder about too is when you, and it's been a while since I've been a part of this process, but how does it, how do you trickle down your goals within the district? Because it's not all on you to
Of
achieve your
course.
goals. It's, you know, it's a trickle down effect with what the administration and teachers and building administration are doing. So, when you're choosing your goals, how are those trickling down?
So the one on the screen might be a really good example of that. So I do meet with the counselors, and they'll share things that they are doing with me so that I have a sense of, like, what kinds of things do I want to support, you know, for them. But essentially, they are doing the work with the kids to say, it's okay not to go to a four-year college, or I know you didn't do your homework last night, and so I need you to get in here and get that math done because, you know, you have to grow that math proficiency. Or Mr. Lebrad is working on CBTE, or getting some of our high school kids in elementary school classrooms, kids who may be interested in going into public education or education generally. So all of those folks are doing things, and they trickle down. I think I chose this goal because we hear so much about that pressure that I really wonder what it looks like for all of our kids who are, and we live with the mantra, all means all. When you put out a survey after graduation, you'll get kids who will say, this negative thing happened, that negative thing happened. And typically you hear from the kids who felt a little disenfranchised in some way. And so how do we make sure that every kid is in under the roof, right?
I mean, I would have a hard time narrowing your goals because they're all great goals. But I feel like it's a lot to manage at that. And I also appreciate too that some of these are over multiple years so that it's not, you know, so focused on 1 year.
Yes, like this one now is hard to quantify, but I would imagine that Judy Martin, when she finishes her research, if she carried it out a couple of years, we'd have a much better sense of, you know, sort of the impact of the K-12 experience, like what's happening to our kids when they go off into the world.
Just
Jack, you can come and tell us.
Yeah.
the
Annual
goals sort of
return.
have been more like 4 or 5. We added one carried over from last year, and then we added goal 7 as school committee request.
It also was supposed to be a light goal, was my.
A light
in
goal.
Looking at the work, that it does not appear to have been, ended up being a light goal at all.
No, we get a little carried away with it, but there's a lot happening.
But something to think about for next year. I agree. Like focusing back on like 4.
Yes.
So, I mean, you have to have one of each of the categories, right? At a minimum, like student achievement and, yeah, district improvement, et cetera. Is there
And you have
anything,
all those indicators, and so many of them overlap with this, you know.
is there anything that concerns you that you need help from us for, like, to see out your goals? We always ask, are there roadblocks or hurdles or concerns about accomplishing? I know the goal you have with the CPAC, I know we have agreements with CPAC. We have to follow up on agreements that we made with our meetings last year. So I don't think that impacts your performance, but we are all sort of building the
Yes.
right framework with CPAC. But is there anything that you're concerned about?
I don't think so, not right now. I mean, to be fair, something like middle school co-teaching is going to be a multi-year thing, you know? So just as long as you're aware that these aren't, they won't be tied up in a neat little bow at the end of the year. I mean, many things will be, but some will not.
And I think it has emerged other years where there are things that appear at the beginning to some of us. Maybe you were thinking all along it was multi-year, but some of the goals appear from our end, I think, that until you see how far into it you get, it becomes apparent that it's,
Right.
to get the work done, you need multiple years to focus.
So goal 3 will, just so that there are no surprises in
Yeah.
June or May, right? Goal 3 we'll expect to be a 2-year goal.
Definitely,
And
yes.
the other goals at the moment are looking like a 1-year goal?
Probably, well, maybe the student experience one might carry out a little bit, because I am interested to see what happens with Judy Martin. I mean, we could maybe just talk about it. But I think the Athena report in this is also something that, you know, when we look at budget this year and we say Abby Hanscom has asked for a couple of special education teachers at the middle school, that really is to grow some programs. So we don't technically have an SEL kind of like formal program at the middle school. So with one of the new special educators, if that person could have SEL IEP students on that person's caseload, it makes the caseloads of everyone else a little smaller, so it makes it more manageable. But I think it also enhances what we're able to do. So it will take some time for the Athena report to unfold, because, you know, incrementally there will be budget pieces, and incrementally Abby will grow the program, and incrementally we will fatten teacher repertoires and all of that, so.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you for that.
All right. That then moves us into policy DI, fiscal accounting and reporting.
All right, so this one was one that was on the Georgette list. This may be the simplest thing ever. We realized,
You shouldn't do our indicators, does that matter? Did you want the indicators?
it might make sense just to take a
Okay.
look at what they are. Let me just make this a little bit bigger. Okay. So to be fair about the indicators, there is an awful lot of overlap, because typically your indicators are woven in with your goals. So the first one is 1A curriculum, and over the next 3 years, the district needs to focus on curriculum work in some very specific areas. For example, with the transition of the Hopkins School to a 5-6 school, curricular choices and revisions are going to need to be made. With the new Elmwood facility, the curriculum would need to expand to include more inquiry-based and active learning. MCAS testing is going to be offered in civics. So all of the things that you see in that box were things that we said, yeah, that's up and coming. I think you've seen some of the decision-making already that we've done for Elmwood and for Hopkins, because educational plans were written for those buildings. Civics, it's going to be interesting to see how our kids do. We know that there's some practice work out there, and I know that Mr. LeBrod has shared that with all of the teachers who are doing civics at particular grade levels. Science MCAS is going to change, because now there's going to be facets of doing science. So those are all of the things that we are working on, and you can see what some of that data looks like over there. Mr. LeBrod did bring a team of educators to the DESE grant-funded CS professional learning that happened over 2 days on December 7th and 8th.
Oh, did you get the CS grant?
We did not get the CS grant.
However-
but we got a wonderful consolation prize. They were so impressed by our application that they offered to allow us to participate at no expense. So we actually did bring a team together. We have a team of just under a dozen teachers and leaders, and a subgroup of that participated in a 2-day offsite to do some strategic planning around what computer science could be, K to 12.
All right, so the second one is instruction. I know that we've already talked a lot about our use of the CRI-OP. And that whole notion that all really can mean all, and we want to make sure that every kid is getting what they need. And I think tonight in the math presentation, you kind of got a taste for we're really looking hard at who's not getting what. A close focus will be placed on the rebounding of special education MCAS growth scores, which have been presented over the last year as somewhat lagging, and special attention will be paid to our subgroups. And so I think you see all of that, and you can always click in there and take a look at the CRI-OP and all of those things that I am presenting to you. The first was the slide deck from our summer conference, the opening day presentation I made to teachers, the CRI-OP and some student data. And I think that one of the arguments that we were making as an admin team, and this probably speaks to the intersection as well, is that when we look at cultural proficiency, I think the first and the fifth pillars in the CRIOP really speak to how we get a student to go from 444 to like 482 in MCAS over 3 years' time with a 90 SGP. So there is a tie between that CRIOP and student achievement, because when you are culturally proficient enough to know what a kid needs, that kid will trust you and start to learn. Yep, we talked about the co-teaching at the middle school, so the rebounding of our special education scores. And the rebounding of special education scores, maybe this is a good example for you too, Lori, is that that's also part of Abby Hanscom's goals. So she is working really hard to make sure that those scores are going up. Student learning, the data that we have unearthed as we examine special education scores, student with disabilities, performance discrepancies, as well as the data DESE offers on the growth scores of our students with IEPs indicate that we need to consider how to bolster learning for children with special education needs. So again, you can sort of see that we are choosing things like the STAR and the MCAS scores, kids' IEPs, some locally grown assessments. But the SGP scores are really where your bread is buttered, because that's not just telling me where a kid is achieving, but it's telling me how much growth that student is making. We would love to see 75 to 80% of our kids meeting or exceeding expectations for all of our kids in the aggregate. We're probably somewhere around 70, 75 now, and that's great, but we really do need to also focus on our subgroups. Almost every year we pick laws, ethics, and policies, and that's probably because we do so much work in policy that it is something that I sort of like to showcase. And when we do our work, or when I do my work around, laws and ethics, one of my goals is to guard the district against any kind of potential liability. I hope that I model ethical behavior. I work respectfully with all of our bargaining units, and this coming year, I may not be correct about that. I think it's just paraprofessionals this year.
Yes.
Is it just paraprofessionals?
Teachers are next year, I think.
Yep. Susan, custodians, are they this year?
No.
Next year, okay. You can see all of the dates that we meet with the HTA. Sometimes it's by phone, sometimes by Zoom, but we do have regular labor management meetings with them. There have only been stipend grievances, and what that means is if we forget to pay a stipend in one fiscal year, they have to grieve it so that we can pay them in the next fiscal year. All right, fiscal systems. I said the budget was going to be a challenging one, and I think financially it might have been, but I think that just in terms of bringing back forward a respectable, fiscally responsible budget, I think we did that, and I think that even though we had to, I think, make a lot of hard decisions, there was really not as much angst as there might have been otherwise. So yeah, I think we've made it through that whole process. Communication, while in past years we've improved our communication with families about student learning and performance, this year we have tools in our toolbox that haven't previously existed. So our Director of English Language Acquisition, Equity, and Access is really fully involved in the placement of our L students at the elementary levels. We started that process today. She is super great at getting into a room with non-English speaking parents and helping them with the registration process. We've made about 10 or 12 changes to the registration process to make sure that we are casting a wide net so that we can catch kids who have maybe immunization needs or socioeconomic needs. We have tools like message sender and talking points so that we can make sure that our L families have a means to communicate with us. And then we have work plans at all of our administrative years that is going to underscore the importance of cultural responsibility this year. And I know that people are probably tired of hearing me say cry up. Cultural proficiency, just as in the indicator above, we've had the Promoting Good audit. We're going to have an equity audit of our curriculum 6 to 12. We've worked carefully with Blackprint. Blackprint is sticking around a little bit, and DESE is still paying them, so we get to access them for free. And I think that we're starting to see, some of the needle moving in terms of MCAS, and yeah, I think our cultural proficiency work is pretty good. Continuous learning. we really believe in that all means all, and I know I say that one all the time, but I don't think that you could find people who were, I think, better advocates and supporters for kids who have all kinds of needs. So in terms of our continuous learning, we make sure that that's happening at a lot of our admin meetings. So I have put in here the district improvement plan, so you could see that at a district level, we believe in that. A couple of the admin retreat, or admin meeting agendas, so that you can see the work we're doing with the new IEP, the work we've done with our self-evaluation, the work that we did in the summertime at the admin retreat. I can grab for you some meeting agendas for PD days, BBMs, staff meetings, PLCs, the elementary leadership team, SLT. All of those things continue to move everybody in this district toward that district improvement plan. All right, and then this is the last one, is shared vision. Last year, we collectively agreed that this should be a multi-year goal. It's no secret that our demographics are changing, and you could see that tonight, I think, in the MCAS data, when you finally had cohorts in socioeconomically disadvantaged students, when we finally had them in, ESOL groups. So you're starting to see that our demographics are really shifting. So this year, I was planning to contact students who didn't choose a post-high school college pathway, carrying out a study of those kids who graduated in the class of 2023 to learn about how their HPS schooling prepared them for life. I'm still doing some CVTE and Comp Sci, and we do have a few more kids who are going to Keefe Tech this year, and just trying to figure out who has chosen Keefe Tech and why they chose it. It's kind of exciting that we have more kids. I know that we bring every eighth grader to Keefe Tech so that they can take a look around. John Evans, who is the superintendent there, does a really nice job of, he's just outgoing and kind of a lovely human that works so well with all of his sending districts.
Any questions on the indicators? Because those are also part of the evaluation at the end. But, again, lots of good information in there. Appreciate that you did also send that to us to look through ahead of time.
Yes, and I'm sorry it takes so long that we do this.
No, that's okay. It's important, and I know it takes a lot of time to put it together, so appreciate all of that. Okay. All right, so now, do we want to go into policy DI, fiscal accounting and reporting?
Sure, so this is going to be the easiest policy ever. This was on Georgette's list, and it was there because paragraph 3 says, the school committee will receive regular financial reports from the superintendent showing the financial condition of the school department. And in reality, when we do this, when we have our financial reports, Mrs. Rothermick delivers them. So what we would like to do is add in the words, or assistant superintendent for finance and operations. That's all.
Huge change.
Seismic.
Oops.
Yeah, that was really hard work for the policy working group.
The policy working group, I know, works very hard on a lot of policies that go deeper, so you deserve one that's only a little thing.
So I'll make the motion.
Tuesday. No, I don't think so. We don't have a meeting for this Tuesday scheduled yet.
For the policy working.
That's the operative word, yet. I need to know really far in advance so I can get my alarm clock set.
Adam, did you have a question?
Oh, no, I was just gonna make the motion.
Okay.
All right.
Oh, sorry.
I move to approve the revised policy DI, fiscal accounting and reporting as presented this evening.
Okay.
Second.
Motion by Adam, second by Lori. All those in favor?
Aye.
It is unanimous. Thank you to Georgette for pulling the things that need little.
She has a lip, doesn't she?
Yes.
All right, that brings us, we have no old business here.
Is that the cliff we're jumping off?
The future agenda items, we do not have anything carrying over from this agenda. We made it through the agenda. If there's anything that people want to make sure that we have not put out, that we're looking to add going forward, if you know now, you can say it, otherwise you can reach out. That brings us into items by consensus.
Okay, as superintendent, I recommend the school committee approve the items by consensus as outlined in your agenda.
So moved.
Motion by Amanda, is there a second?
Second.
Second by Lori, all those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Unanimous, thank you for all that. And then that moves us down into adjournment. Is there somebody who would like to?
I'd like to move for adjournment.
Second.
Motion by Susan, second by Adam, all those in favor? Aye. We are adjourned at 9:14. Our next meeting is on February 1st. It's a regular meeting, it will occur here, and then another one on February 15th. Thank you all for tuning in, have a good night.